Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us today. We really appreciate your participation. Today's session is being produced in collaboration with the American Frozen Food Institute. A big thank you to Allison Boder and our partners at AFI for their support. Also, a big thank you to PwC for their support of the CPG Speak series. For more information on upcoming events, please visit consumerbrandsassociation.org/CPG Speaks. Today, I'm joined by Sean Connolly, President and CEO of Conagra Brands. You know the brands well: Orville Redenbacher popcorn, Vlasic pickles, Hebrew National hot dogs, Healthy Choice, and my favorite, Big sunflower seeds. Obviously a company that we all know well, and we're excited to have Sean with us today. If you're interested in asking questions, we're going to follow the typical session format that we've done in the past. Sean and I will speak for about 30 minutes, and then we'll move to your questions. So please use the Q&A feature on Zoom to submit your questions. We look forward to getting to those when we have a few minutes near the end. Obviously, CPG companies for many years have excelled at product innovation, but COVID has tested all of us in a different way, and the need for innovative solutions to address safety and productivity across the supply chain has skyrocketed in recent months. I'm happy to have Sean with us today to share how Conagra has rebalanced its innovation focus and some of the potential long-lasting changes to the Conagra process. Sean will also share how the company has maintained its sense of culture and empowered employees to work with a winning mentality during these crisis times. Sean, thanks for being with us today.
Thanks, Jeff. I appreciate you having me.
It's great to have you. I was joking with you before. You found a sport coat. I've had trouble finding mine, so it's good to see that some people still know where that stuff is. I'm going to work on that in the weeks ahead. Let me talk to you a little bit and just start with the easy stuff. A little bit about your career. 1992, you began at Procter & Gamble. You moved from there to Campbell Soup. You took over the top job at Hillshire Brands, and now here you are at Conagra. Tell us a little bit about your journey, how you got to where you are, why you're still sticking it out with this industry.
Well, coming out of business school, I was very interested in consumer packaged goods and food in particular. I thought, hey, this is an admirable industry. It provides an essential service. Everybody eats, everybody needs the nourishment, everybody likes food, and the industry also helps combat hunger. And at the time, the companies were blue chip companies, incredible talent, great competitors that keep each other sharp, and really good brands. So the industry itself was attractive to me, but it was the work that really pulled me into the industry. The fact that I love to be a problem solver. And when it comes to dealing with the consumer, the problem solving never ends. And that's because the consumer is always changing their tastes and you have to keep up with them. So even to this day, I feel like my work is not done. I got to stay sharp because this consumer is always evolving. So that's how I got into the industry, and that's kind of why I'm still here.
So we're going to get into that consumer aspect because it's never been more important than it is today, and obviously the changes that are happening in a rapid way right now. Give me a little bit from those diverse experiences, P&G, Campbell's, Hillshire, a couple lessons that you've picked up along the way that still stick with you in your Conagra leadership.
Well, at the core, we are brand builders. And I think probably the overarching lesson that has stuck with me is that big iconic brands can be evergreen, but only if you are perpetually modernizing them. I always say to my team, there's a fine line between an icon and an antique. And in order for an iconic brand not to become an antique, you have to be a student of what's going on out there with the consumer, how their tastes are changing, and then design those attributes into your products in a perpetual way. And if you do that, you keep brands fresh. And so that's really been the key lesson is, people used to say, well, that's a tired brand. And, as the saying goes, the brands don't get tired. It's the people that work on the brands that can get tired. And that's within our control. So we try to stay sharp by studying the consumer. And we believe that big iconic brands can remain strong and can remain evergreen if you are a great innovative house.
Well, you certainly made that point to me from the earliest conversations that we had, that the importance of investing in these iconic brands. I'm going to talk about that a little bit more in a moment, but let's talk about the consumer right now. Obviously, COVID has had remarkable effects, and in your recent earnings, 2021 first quarter earnings, you talked about how refrigerated and frozen are up about 18%. Food service is down, as you would expect, about 22%. But you've shifted your focus to where it needs to be, where the consumer is going today. Talk a little bit about how that consumer is reacting, how they're responding, how it's forcing you to respond.
Sure. Well, we had a tremendous response in this quarter that we announced last week, and we had a tremendous response from the consumer the quarter before that. And I'd like to think that it's not just the tailwind of COVID, but it's a lot of work that's been done in our portfolio over the last 5 years to really modernize these brands and infuse some industry-leading innovation into the marketplace over those years. What's happening now is the consumers are discovering it at unprecedented rates. And clearly, this pandemic has created a consumer dislocation, the likes of which we have not seen before. And it's been an unbelievable thing to witness. You know, back in March, we saw this incredible spike where there was panic shopping. You had a frustrated and bitter consumer who felt like they were forced into their house, and they kind of believed it was going to be short-lived. But a very interesting thing started happening over the course of the summer, which is that same consumer became resigned to the fact that this was not going to be a quick solve and that they were likely going to be in their home for a lot longer than they initially expected. And then what we began to see is they were not just buying our products and other products in the consumer packaged goods space, but they were beginning to invest in their homes. They were buying new furniture, new restaurant equipment, upgrading their kitchen, buying new kitchen tools, learning how to cook again, really rediscovering their kitchens and rediscovering their homes. They even rediscovered they like spending time with family members around meals. So now that they've made these investments into really nesting or cocooning, whatever you want to call it, we expect they're going to want to get a return on that investment. And that foreshadows a continued elevated level of in-home eating occasions for the foreseeable future. And certainly, you know, that stands to benefit the whole industry, but it won't be that all players perform equally against that backdrop. I think the companies that have spent the most time in the last several years modernizing and refreshing their portfolios will disproportionately outperform. And that's because a lot of new household penetration is happening in the industry, which means consumers who weren't previously buying these products are discovering them for the first time. Once they see them, if they find them provocative, they'll try them. And then if the products are designed really well, they will repeat purchase. And so what we shared last week is we've not only seen elevated levels of new household penetration and trial, but we've seen unbelievable repeat performance. So that's what we're watching. And you know, we believe it's going to be sticky for some time to come.
So if you're in the food service business, if you're in the restaurant business or otherwise, I think the assumption has been, well, once there's a vaccine, once the restaurants are open, people are going to get back out there right away. Would you argue that, you know what, people have been introduced to the quality of our products, they're enjoying these now in record numbers, they're not going to be as fast to go back in restaurants, even when it's safe, because they found the product to be a reasonably good substitute?
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm suggesting. And look, I've got an enormous amount of respect for restaurateurs, the entrepreneurs who have the guts to go out there with their dream and start their own business. And it's very painful to see them struggling the way they are right now. And I'm hopeful that many of them can survive and can keep their businesses open. But what we know is that not only will these consumers have made these investments in their home, but they will have discovered that they enjoy these eating occasions at home. And furthermore, you know, we're in recessionary times, so their household balance sheets are going to be stretched. So even if they had pent up demand to get back out there, they may say, you know what, I'm not in a position to do that with the frequency that I did it before. So that again points to continued elevated eating occasions in the home.
We, as you talked about, you're refrigerated and frozen up about 18%. Across the board, the industry is averaging, when you put all the categories together, up about 10%. You can't pull that off without substantial changes to your operations. Talk a little bit about the major operational changes you guys have had to make to meet this demand.
Well, that's a really good point. You know, in any given year, our typical focus is disproportionately on demand generation. How do we generate demand? You know, what more can we do to further optimize demand? This year, it's the opposite. We are focused heavily on supply, product supply, and how do we maximize product supply? For a couple of reasons. One, it's the best thing for our business long term if we can maximize the consumer experience with our products in the here and now. But the other reason is, you know, people need it. There's anxiety, there's stress, there are shortages in food pantries and food banks and the like. So we really do provide an essential service, and we need to maximize supply. And to do that, we've had to do things that we've never done before. You'd expect us to take meaningful action in the physical environment of our manufacturing facilities, and we've done that in order to ensure that we create the safest possible environment. So we have to ensure social distancing the same way we do here in the office, and we have to ensure that we've got protective personal equipment, we've got barriers. So we've done things like add plexiglass barriers, make sure we've got all the PPE, have incredible sanitation practices. But we've also had to do things like stagger the way people enter and exit the plants, stagger break times so people are not together and they're apart. Lots of in-the-moment logical things that enable people to get their job done, but manage a safe distance. So that's the one that you would expect. The other one, too, is as we think about maximizing unit volume, there's an abundance of SKUs in this industry. Not all of them, obviously, are equal in size or velocity. And you can get more units out the door of your manufacturing facilities when you run fewer SKUs, fewer items. So there has been a tightening of items produced in this window because it maximizes unit supply. And that's deliberate, and it's pretty much across the manufacturer base. We're doing it, our peers are doing it, and it does help us to maximize volume. Even with those adaptations that we have made, supply is still strained. This past quarter, we began to replenish what was really just a cleaned out supply at the end of our fourth quarter, but we're not done. While we've begun to replenish, the elevated demand, it remains there. So it takes some time to get back to normalized inventory levels. When you're running flat out, you still have issues at the plants where you may have more absenteeism in this environment because people are sick or they're being cautious that they don't come to work with any symptoms. So it's still a very strained supply chain, but we've made some progress, I think, in our company and across the industry, and the teams are just doing an absolutely extraordinary job on the front lines to keep each other safe and to keep the food coming so that we continue to provide this essential service.
Hopefully we get back to a point, right, where we don't have to have the plastic barriers and all of the PPE beyond what is certainly necessary from a food safety standpoint in these facilities. Are there some of these changes, though, that you think are permanent? This is going to be here for the long term, whether it's SKU rationalization or other operational changes?
Well, even before COVID, our view was that there was room for SKU rationalization and that our retail customers were leaving money on the table by having too many out of stocks. So we thought there were too many SKUs to begin with. We took the position long before COVID that should change, that the top movers in our categories should get more facings and therefore be in stock more frequently, because the benefit to the consumer, the benefit to the customer, and the benefit to manufacturer would be greater to do that than to have a long tail of small items that are very slow moving. So I think the movement toward, I won't call it SKU rationalization, but I'll call it SKU optimization, is upon us. And I think one of the things you'll see coming out of COVID is that there will still be an abundance of assortment and varieties on the physical shelf, or in the case of e-commerce, on the digital shelf, but the varieties will have been modernized. And there are still a lot of outdated artifact type of items that populate the shelves. Those tend to be the slower movers. Those tend to be the ones that won't make it. And if they go away post-COVID, that'll create an opening for more new innovations that offer new modern benefits. And ultimately, that will be a better assortment for our consumer. It'll be faster turning for our customer, and it'll be good news for the brands and the manufacturers.
Someone might wonder if all this focus on meeting the extraordinary demand at this point in time, could that take your eye off the ball in terms of the long-term growth of the company? How do you balance that?
Well, an interesting thing has happened here. We've spent the better part of 4 to 5 years now really building an innovation machine here at Conagra and infusing an enormous amount of innovation into the marketplace. Our goal was to have what we call a renewal rate of 15%, which is 15% of our annual sales comes from stuff that we've launched in the prior 3 years. We've exceeded that for some time now. So we've been driving new innovation into the marketplace for the last several years. And what's interesting is while that innovation has performed really well, there was still significant room for new households yet to discover that, because while it may not be brand new, innovations that are 24 months old are still pretty darn new. So what we're finding is that these new consumers that we hadn't had previously are really thrilled with these innovations that we put out over the last 2, 3, 4 years, in addition to the brand new innovations that have come into the marketplace this year. So the need for the number of SKUs that are brand new in this environment is probably not as high. But one of the things that has surprised me is that our customer demand for it has remained intact. I thought at the beginning of the pandemic that we may see a delay on some of our innovations rolling into the marketplace, because customers would say, let's just focus on the old stuff, which is not that old, as I just pointed out, and maximizing the volumes, the sheer volumes. But that really hasn't happened. The demand from our customers for our brand new stuff has remained incredibly high. And to my surprise, the slate we've got into the marketplace this year is even larger than the big slate we had last year. So that was a bit of a surprise to me, but in part that has been earned because our performance and innovation has been so strong in the last few years, and we know our shoppers want it, and the customers therefore want it as well.
There's been so much talk that all of this demand is kind of like Thanksgiving week over and over and over again. Well, here we are coming up on Thanksgiving. We're coming up on what some project to be a second wave. You mentioned to me in studying the great Spanish flu that there was a third wave. What's keeping you up at night in terms of your concern and our ability to meet that demand through the holiday season and beyond?
Well, a couple of things. Number one, we have to, in order to maximize supply, we have to continue to keep people safe. And we've done a great job in our facilities and in our office here. But one of the things that we've had to constantly remind our employees is that they have to take care of themselves when they're out of work. Because a lot of times when you see people getting sick, it's because they're at work, they're in an incredibly safe environment that is engineered to keep them at a distance from others and is engineered to ensure that they're in PPE all the time. But then in their personal lives, their guard gets let down and they interact with larger groups. And that's where, the risk comes in is people let their guard down in their personal life. And so that's on my mind as we get to the holidays, because, people do like to get together in the holidays. I'm also wondering, how will the holidays look differently this year in terms of what people do and how they spend their time? I would anticipate that you will see fewer large group gatherings at Thanksgiving, as an example. It's typically a big tradition. People get together, extended family in large groups, and they cook in abundance. Well, what if that doesn't happen this year? What if families decide they're not going to get together with their cousins and their extended family, and they're each going to cook their own dinner? Are they going to cook a small Thanksgiving dinner? That's an oxymoron. There's no such thing as a small Thanksgiving dinner. So if you've got more smaller units cooking Thanksgiving dinner and they still cook in abundance, that means more demand. That means more volume needed. So it's just another reminder to us that we've got to maximize our supply, particularly heading into the holidays.
Let's switch and talk a little bit about innovation. Obviously, something that has been your mantra from the moment you joined Conagra, and your efforts to revitalize these brands. You guys recently released a canned soup with a plant-based meat. Something that I don't think anyone has done to date. Talk a little bit about how you arrive at products like that, what your approach to innovation is.
Well, the brand you're talking about, Jeff, is Gardein. And Gardein is a fantastic brand that came to us by way of acquisition a couple of years ago. And it's really been remarkable to watch this whole plant-based meat alternative movement. When I first saw it hit the marketplace, it was clearly a vegan or vegetarian movement. But in recent years, it's become a flexitarian movement. And people who are, unabashed meat eaters say, hey, look, I love my meat, but I don't need to have that 100% of the time. I wouldn't mind it if some of my meals were vegan or vegetarian or plant-based. And so you saw this explosion in the last few years of plant-based meat alternatives that originally appealed to that vegetarian vegan audience, now appealing to a much, much broader audience. And Gardein is just an incredible product. Whether you're eating our chicken or our ultimate burger, we even have Gardein fish fillet that if you've ever eaten a McDonald's filet of fish sandwich, it tastes exactly like that. We even have crab cakes that are plant-based alternatives. So it's just a mind-blowing line. And historically, it's been in frozen with a little bit in food service. But sometimes when you see these trends take on a life of their own and they're this explosive, you have to ask yourself, if the plant-based meat alternative works in frozen, why would it not offer an opportunity in other categories where meat is present, but consumers would like to see some of their eatings become meat-free? And so we do look at these adjacency opportunities in any category where we see extremely robust growth. And certainly we've seen that with plant-based meat alternatives. And soup was a logical one, because when you think of soup, you think of things like chicken noodle soup or beef vegetable soup. And what if that user occasionally wants to have it without the chicken or without the beef, but they want to have a similar eating experience? That's where Gardein comes in. I think even more interesting to me is if you look at jerky. You think of jerky and you think of beef jerky and you think of market leaders like Jack Link's, and it's 100% beef. Our Gardein plant-based jerky that just came out is unbelievable. It looks like beef jerky. It's smoked like beef jerky. It chews like beef jerky. It tastes like beef jerky, but it's 100% plant-based. It's mind-blowing. And so when you deliver these kinds of surprises to consumers in categories they love, offering modern benefits that they're looking for, it tends to work. And so we're gonna see how it goes.
Well, when you say it's great, you speak from experience, because one of the more interesting things I've heard is that you and others on the senior leadership team are now a part of the whole testing process that goes on with these new products. That's got to be fascinating. Talk a little bit about the insights that gives you. And I mean, I would love just the concept of being there and tasting all these things, seeing what's coming down the pike. I imagine 9 out of 10 of them don't get to the market or more, but it's got to give you great insights.
Well, it's, to understand how that works here, you have to understand a little bit about our company. We're a big company. We compete in lots of categories that are, top consumer categories. But while we're a big company with a lot of categories, we're predominantly a North America company. And that allows us to run a very lean shop and a very flat organization. In fact, our innovation work around our brands is pretty much done out of this building under one roof here in Chicago. So when we get together and we talk about innovations, we try to be agile, we try to be entrepreneurial, and we try to be kind of layer free. So you'll have everybody in those meetings, from the summer interns, the product developers, the package developers, our chefs, the brand folks, myself, other members of my senior leadership team. And we kind of check rank at the door, and we have a rigorous debate around, first, the demand science. What is the demand science telling us the consumer is looking for? Then we look at design, package design, product design, food design. We listen to the chefs about the culinary sensibility that they're looking for in these products. Then we bring in the analytics team, the quantitative side of it, and say, what is that telling us? And then we have a hearty debate, and we apply good old-fashioned judgment, experience, pattern recognition, and we make a decision. We understand that innovation is a numbers game. You're not going to get it all right, but you'd rather be fast and miss a few than be slow and regret never getting them into the marketplace. So it's a very unusual process versus what I've experienced previously in my career. It works for us. We don't get it all right, but our hit rate is better than average.
Do you ever see people falling into the trap of saying, well, Sean seems to like this, I guess we're all going to like this, and give it a shot?
Yep, I sure do. I call that the Sean said phenomenon, and I have to watch myself on that because I'm an extroverted thinker. I'll put an idea out there, not because I actually have conviction in it. I'm just kind of testing the waters, and I want to get a reaction to it and see what others think. And it makes my day when a junior employee will look at it and say, I understand why you think that might work, but it's actually a bad idea. Let me break it down for you and tell you why. I love those kinds of experiences. I wish they happened more often. I try to foster it, but part of it goes with the job title, that you have that kind of dynamic. But it's I would not call it a headwind. It's just it goes with the territory.
Well, it's a great, it seems like a process would be a lot of fun to be a part of. I've got to imagine your team likes it. It's, I think, something that really fosters, the great culture. We're going to get to culture in a few moments. So kudos to you for that. As you mentioned, the innovation isn't all around the pack or all around the product. Some of the innovation is around the packaging. It's around other aspects of it. You guys just rolled out some innovative packaging on your Swiss Miss line. If you could talk about that, I know a big focus on sustainability there. Talk about how you look at innovation kind of in totality.
Well, we have an awesome team that works on sustainability here at Conagra, and they're always pushing us to kind of think about what the next big idea is. But one of the big ones, as an example, is this surge in kind of waste around single-use plastic packaging that's happened in recent years. And we know that's not good for the planet. We know the consumer doesn't like it. And we've pledged to replace all of our current single-serve plastic packaging and frozen, as an example, with renewable, recyclable, plant-based fiber packaging here going forward. In fact, we've already done it on our large Healthy Choice line. This year, we rolled it out to our Hungry Man line as well as P.F. Chang ramen bowls. And I got to tell you, it is an absolutely awesome looking package. The consumer absolutely loves it, prefers it to their traditional plastic package. Some have the perception they shouldn't be microwaving plastic, so it's emotionally reassuring to them. So it's just a win across the board. And you have to get after this stuff. You have to make investments, and you have to take some risks. And we were kind of the pioneer on it. It's worked, and now we see others following as well. And we took that same approach on Swiss Miss with the example that you shared. But when we think about our brands, I can't stress this enough. It is not just about the product. It's certainly not just about marketing. It's got to be product, package, marketing, the way you sell. All of it's got to come together and really work synergistically if you're going to create that optimum consumer experience.
So we touched on this a little bit earlier, whether it's new product innovation or the brands that have always been there, this is a time in the sun for iconic brands. And you've said to me before that what these brands needed was some TLC, they needed some investment, they needed some creativity brought to them. Well, COVID, it seems, for many of them is their time in the sun. As COVID dissipates, and we can't wait for that to happen, right? As it dissipates, what have we learned in the past that's going to ensure that we don't make the same mistake we made perhaps in the early 2000s, the late 90s, whenever it was, that let these brands get into a state of struggle?
Yeah, well, we contemplated that question here at Conagra, not in a COVID environment, but back in 2015 when I first joined the company, and we set out to kind of restate our company values. And, after a lot of deliberation, the first value you might expect is integrity. But we said, well, what will be the second value be? And believe it or not, we landed on a company value that's pretty unusual, but we said it's external focus. That's our second message to our employees. We value external focus because our attention should be out there on what the consumer is doing, not in here in the office, focused on meetings and PowerPoint presentations and, getting ahead in our careers vis-a-vis one another. That's not going to help us win with the customer and with the consumer. So we do put a tremendous focus on externally on the consumer, because when you do that, you learn a lot. And when you learn what the consumer wants, you're now equipped to design those attributes into your products. So I think the big lesson for us that predates COVID is you have to perpetually be looking externally, understanding that consumer tastes are changing relentlessly, and then designing what the consumer wants into your products on a nonstop basis. And right now, with respect to the big brands, not all big brands are in the same spot. The big brands that are performing the best are brands that have gone through the heavy lift of modernizing their brands over the last several years, such that when the consumer is discovering them now, a consumer who didn't see them before, they're saying, hey, this is new, this meets my needs, this is provocative, and then they try it, and if it's well designed, they'll come back and purchase it again. So I think that it's not just about being a big brand. You've got to be a big brand that's been modernized. Then you've got to have the supply chain that can keep up with this intense demand. If you've got those two things in place, I think that big brand is going to have a real tailwind for some time to come.
For those of you that have questions, I encourage you to submit them through the Q&A function on Zoom. I'm going to switch to our last topic area, which is around culture. And I'm going to get the culture with Conagra, but I want to start with culture of the industry. You mentioned the reason you joined the industry, these big blue chip companies. I think you raved about the culture at certain aspects. But you've hinted to me over time that it felt like that culture kind of waned a little bit in terms of the industry working together. What is your assessment of what it's been in recent years and what you see forming via COVID and beyond?
Well, it's always been a fiercely competitive industry because everybody wants to win and everybody wants to have, the best market share performance. But it's also, the roots of the industry are very collegial in the sense that, all these companies understood that they did provide an essential service to consumers, and that was important, and that if they did a good job at that and kept the supply strong and built products that people want, everybody would thrive. And, that, like anything in life, that will wane and ebb and flow over time. But in recent years, I've seen that come back together, where there's this genuine belief that I talked about before, that iconic brands can remain evergreen and can be strong and vibrant if you keep them fresh and if you spend time studying the consumer and giving the consumer what they want. And on top of that, in the COVID environment, there's a tremendous sense of responsibility that the CEOs, my peers, have felt to make sure we are maximizing supply, to make sure we are keeping people fed, to make sure we're giving to the food banks and doing our part in our own communities and backyards to help people out when they're stressed, to help manage their stress. So there's this collective pride that that I remember being in place strongly in the industry when I started, and I see it again today. And it's fantastic, because my message to young people who would be considering a career in this industry would be, go for it. It's absolutely, in my mind, one of the best places you could spend your career, getting some real responsibility at a young age, managing brands that everybody can relate to, that are a lot of fun. And in our case, it's food, and who doesn't like to be around food?
You've talked about a little bit about the culture of the organization being more flat in terms of its leadership structure, people being empowered. You want people to speak up and kind of push back, I think, a little bit on some of the suggestions that you and others are making, and have that healthy discussion. How has COVID made that more difficult? Obviously, distance working for so many people. How have you actually seen perhaps benefits from COVID in terms of what it's done for the culture inside the company?
Yeah, it's been a real interesting one for us, because if you look at our roots, we're a 100-year-old company, and we've got, roots in agriculture, but that is not at all who we are today. We used to be a diversified global conglomerate, more of a holding company. Today, we're a branded, pure play, largely North American business. And so we have engineered and built a culture here that is highly collaborative, highly inclusive, very fast-paced, very flat, and very entrepreneurial. And if that sounds like it's very interactive, it's because it is. So when COVID hit, we really thought long and hard about how do we keep the value of these highly iterative interactions that we have alive.
I just had to hang up because I was answering your question.
We don't fall back, into where we were previously. And, that's been a challenge. And I think we started by saying, look, in this environment, we got to start with being flexible. We got to meet people where they are, and we've got to adapt. And adaptability is going to be a key piece. So we made changes. I'll give you an example. You talked about the innovation meetings we do and the cuttings we do. Typically, we do them down the hall here in our innovation center, and we're all gathered around in large groups, and the chefs are presenting the food. Well, how do you keep that? How do you keep that interaction with the food when everybody's in separate locations? And while it was an incremental cost, what we did is we would send prototypes of our food packed in dry ice, if it was a frozen product as an example, to everybody's house who was involved in these product cuttings, so that everybody could really lay them out while we were on a Zoom call or a WebEx call, and we could all be looking at the same food. We all got experience with preparation instructions, and we could see, do they work? Do they not work? So these are the kind of workarounds that we did to try to get through the night, in addition to just having, incredible amount of communications, video series that we would push out to our teams. But I'll tell you, it's not going to be like this forever. We are a unapologetically kind of in-person company. At our core, we're brand builders. The central work around brand building that is cross-functional is highly collaborative, it's highly creative, it's highly iterative. You might meet on something, have some ideas, tweak it, and say, let's get back together in 90 minutes. So, our office here in Chicago has been open since June 15th. We haven't invited a lot of people in, but we've got a lot of key people who are used to interacting on a daily basis around this new innovation pipeline in the office, because that work is very creative, and we believe it is an advantage to be together in person. Other roles, other jobs, can easily be done in a virtual way. So, it's all part of flexibility, and it remains to be seen how it'll ultimately unfold. But I suspect we'll have a core operation, especially around our innovation cross-functionally, that'll be, a high-touch, in-person type of shop. And we'll have some that will be, more back and forth between virtual and being in the office. We've got a whole work stream right now on the workplace of the future to try to figure that out. And it's like any change management that we go through, we're not going to be afraid of it. We're going to solve for it.
Do you expect companies to be competing over talent in terms of virtual work and where they allow people to work? I hear your point. There are some jobs that are just in person. We've also learned through COVID that there are other jobs that are more flexible, perhaps, than many of us realized. Do you expect this to be a point of talent competition with your peers?
I don't know. Yeah, maybe it's competition, but I think I think people will naturally gravitate to what works for them and what kinds of companies work for them. What I can see right now is there are a whole bunch of people, even today, that will say, I can do some of my work at home, but some of it I would prefer to be in the office. There's a group of people that say, I want to be in the office all the time. My work environment at home is not conducive to getting the job done well. I'd prefer to be in the office. And then there are some people that say, now that I've gotten a taste for it, I'd rather work from home all the time. So I think you're going to see people fall into those camps. And I think the work at companies like ours will have jobs that fit into each of those camps. So people will have to kind of flow to what works for them. And that may lead to, some shifting in terms of who works where and who thinks that their current company works for them or it doesn't. And that's okay. That's part of the natural evolution of how these organizations keep up with the times.
You mentioned on a couple of occasions, we are a North American company. Is there an urge to expand beyond that?
Well, we've got plenty to do still yet right here in our own backyard. We have some really strong international businesses in Mexico and in Canada, but we don't have much of a business beyond Mexico and Canada. And, getting those businesses to, have a sizable beachhead that you can really build off of takes time and takes work. So that's an investment. And I think we've got other investments right here in North America right now where we can see our way to a better return. And we also view that as not just offensive, but defensive. It protects the businesses we've built in our core markets by continuing to strengthen our flanks there.
We've talked a lot about the changes in the consumer. There's one big change that we haven't yet touched on, that's e-commerce. How does that, we know how it affects retailers, whether it's click and collect or whatever it may be. How does that affect you? How is it affecting your thinking as a business? What does the future hold?
Well, I can tell you, I have 4 kids, and I don't think any of them have bought a piece of clothing except using a mouse and a computer in the last several years. So I can see it firsthand that, this move to e-tailing is not going to ever slow down. And it's especially with young people, but really all generations. So we've anticipated that. How could you not anticipate that? And we've invested to build our capabilities in e-commerce. And you have to do that. If you're going to have a tailwind in e-commerce with very little capabilities. But if you want to really maximize the opportunity, you have to build the capabilities, and you have to know how to partner with these retailers and e-tailers, and you have to know how to drive awareness and trial on your products in that environment. And a lot goes into it. But we've seen a tremendous payoff for the investments we've made there. For the last couple of quarters, our business has been up over 100% in running quarters, and we're outpacing from a growth standpoint our peers. So we like what we see. We're going to continue to invest there. It's not going to slow down. We're still in the early innings. We forecast it's going to be a huge piece of our business. And what's really interesting is you look at some of our categories like frozen food as an example, and you say, well, that's not going to work in a home delivery environment. Well, it does. And that too is growing robustly. It's not just our snacks business. It's our frozen business as well. And, we're going to keep working with our customers to help them build out their e-commerce platforms, because it's not just important to the consumer, it's important to them, and it's important to us.
2 other questions I want to get to in the limited time we have left. One, we talk about these iconic brands, and one thing that perhaps goes hand in hand with iconic brands to a degree is they're comforting. How do you balance that nature of being comforting with refreshing these brands? When we think of some of those brands that we grew up with, they may not have been as healthy as today's consumer demands. They may not have been as sensible as today's consumer demands. How do you balance that comfort with the refreshing that's necessary, obviously?
Well, for us, it's easy because we have such a vast portfolio that we can meet you where you are, whatever kind of mood you're in. If you are stressed and you want to be comforted, we've got a new line of Duncan Hines epic cakes and brownies that are coming out, cookies that'll blow your mind. And, we won't apologize for the nutritionals on that. It's a treat. It's meant to be a treat. It's not something I would suggest that you eat every single day of the week. By the same token, if you want to have a balanced life and you want to have healthy choices as well, we've got a great lineup of Healthy Choice Power Bowls that are grain-free that we can give you. So, from a consumer taste standpoint, we fully understand that every consumer has different tastes, and they have the same consumer might have different needs during the course of the same day, and we want to be able to offer them choices. But whether it's an indulgent product or whether it's a healthy product, it's got to be modern. I suppose you can drive some comfort out of nostalgia, but that's not really our playbook. We don't think nostalgia gets us that far with today's consumer. We'd rather take that nostalgic, iconic brand and actually make it look like a modern supercar of today instead of an artifact of yesterday. We think that's a better proposition for not only our consumer, but for our P&L.
Let me close with an important question, obviously an important question in these times, and it's around the issue of diversity and inclusion. Obviously, this has been a critical time this summer. We all experience that. The commitment that our industry makes in this area is substantial, and yet we can do more and do better. Talk a little bit about Conagra's commitment, and an interesting question that came in. What, Sean, have you learned during this process?
Well, it's been as you can imagine, first COVID was the big topic in our building, and then it was really about racial equality and D&I, and the fact that while we all saw horrible things unfold over the summer, how can we use that as a catalyst to turn that into something positive? And how can Conagra up our game in terms of our own D&I and things we can do to support racial equality? So, I've personally learned a lot. I think our team has learned a lot, first by listening. One of the things that we did that's been really cool here in the last couple of months is we created this program called the Testimonial Speaker Series, where we've encouraged our employees who have felt marginalized or had experiences that others could learn from to come forward on a voluntary basis and provide their own testimonial, tell their story in the spirit of educating others so others could be better equipped to help do something about it, to help get some traction and get some momentum so that we could each contribute more to racial equality in our society and within the building, improve our performance going forward in terms of diversity and inclusivity. So that's just one of the things that's been going on. But ultimately, it needs to be something that all your employees can contribute to, that they feel like they can have a role in. And what we believe is that if we want to make real progress here further beyond what we've done, it really falls into three buckets. It falls into recruiting, it falls into advocacy, and it falls into development. And in each of those buckets, there are a long list of things that we can be doing and will be doing to make sure we live up to that expectation of upping our game on D&I overall.
Thank you, Sean. Thank you for participating in this session. Thank you for the positivity and energy that you bring to Conagra and to the industry. We really appreciate it. I appreciate what you do for us, so thank you for that. A big thank you to PwC, who sponsors these sessions, and our partner in AFI for their support today. We're really grateful for that. Again, if you're interested in seeing more about the series, consumerbrandsassociation.org/CPG Speaks. We look forward to continuing these sessions throughout the fall. And again, Sean, thank you so much.
Thanks, Jeff.
Take care.